Addiction isn't just about substances. It's not just about poor choices or bad habits. And childhood trauma isn't something you just get over. These two forces, trauma and addiction, are deeply intertwined. Now, let's start with some stats. Over 75% of people in substance use treatment report a history of childhood trauma. Adults who experience four or more adverse childhood experiences or ACEs are five to 10 times more likely to become addicted to alcohol or drugs. Now, studies show that each additional ACE increases the risk of early drug use by 2 to 4 times. Now, trauma literally reshapes the brain, especially in children. It rewires how we process fear, reward, trust, and self control. This isn't just coincidence, it's a pattern, and it's one we can't ignore. So, yeah, settle in. This video isn't just about facts, it's about truth, pain, resilience, and what we can do about it. So, welcome back to the YouTube channel. And today's video might just be one of the most important discussions that I've had. I'm going to be diving deep into a topic that is often brushed under the carpet. It's also misunderstood or massively oversimplified. But the truth is, it affects millions. We're talking about the profound and often devastating link between childhood trauma and addiction. And if we don't start understanding this connection with the depth and seriousness it deserves, we're going to keep missing we're going to keep missing the mark. Not just in how we treat addiction, but in how we understand the human experience itself. So first of all, let's define childhood trauma. So to begin, we need to define what we mean by childhood trauma. Childhood trauma refers to distressing or disturbing experiences that occur before the age of 18 years old. These experiences can range from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse to neglect, witnessing domestic violence, experiencing the loss of a caregiver, or growing up in a household impacted by addiction or mental health illnesses. Now, many people hear the word trauma and picture extreme, isolated incidents, but trauma can be chronic and insidious. It can be the daily exposure to emotional neglect, the constant unpredictability of parents' behaviour, or growing up in poverty without a sense of safety. Trauma isn't always visible, but it always leaves a mark. When this trauma happens during childhood, it impacts a brain and nervous system that are still developing, and that's where the story starts to unravel in ways that echo throughout a person's entire life. Now, what are the psychological impacts of trauma? Okay, so imagine being a child and never feeling safe. Imagine never knowing if today will bring chaos, violence, abandonment, or shame. Over time, a child living in that environment doesn't just grow anxious, they adapt. Their brain and body adjust to survive, but in doing so, they pay a heavy price. Chronic exposure to stress and trauma alters a child's developing brain, especially in regions responsible for emotional regulation, memory, impulse control, and decision making. Now, we sometimes have to understand about the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic and judgment, and the hippocampus, which processes memory. These changes don't just cause more disorders, they set the stage for how a person will deal with stress, how they'll deal with relationships and emotional pain for the rest of their life. And when emotional regulation is impaired, when fear feels like a default state, and when trust in others is shattered, the natural human response is to find something, anything that soothes the pain. Enter addiction. Now, we have the self-medication hypothesis. So this brings us to the self-medication hypothesis, which is a key explanation for why so many people who struggle with addiction have a history of trauma. The theory suggests that people use substances not to party or have fun, but to cope, to soothe anxiety, to escape depression, to silence the intrusive thoughts and unbearable memories that trauma leaves behind. If you were traumatized as a child, you may grow up with a baseline level of emotional pain that feels unbearable. You may experience hypervigilance, constantly on edge, never able to relax, or emotional numbness, where nothing feels real or worth engaging in. For many, substances like alcohol, opioids, marijuana, or stimulants provide a temporary escape. They turn down the volume on pain, they help you sleep, they make you feel alive. But the relief is always temporary and the cost is always high. And so begins the cycle. Pain leads to substance use. Substance use temporarily masks the pain but creates shame and dependency. That shame intensifies the trauma, which leads to more substance use. And so the spiral continues. Okay, so now let's talk about the neurobiological changes and the brain's reward system. Now, the relationship between trauma and addiction is not just emotional, it's biological. Trauma literally rewires the brain's reward system. The dopamine, the serotonin, and the endorphins, all chemicals associated with pleasure, mood, and reward, they all can be disrupted by early trauma. A traumatized brain is often starved of pleasure. Activities that bring joy to others may feel dull or empty to someone with unresolved trauma. Substances, however, hijack the brain's reward pathways. They deliver a surge of dopamine that can mimic what the brain is missing. It's artificial, but it works, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, trauma impairs the prefrontal cortex, making it harder for a person to think long term, weigh consequences, or resist urges. The result, a brain that is wired to seek relief at all costs, without the capacity to fully evaluate the consequences of that relief. Now, what about the cycle of trauma and addiction? What makes all of this more devastating is that addiction doesn't just sit still, it creates more trauma. Think about the behaviours that often accompany addiction: risky sex, criminal activity, job loss, broken relationships, financial ruin, homelessness. These are not just consequences, they are new traumatic events. They deepen the shame and reinforce the belief that recovery is out of reach. And the world doesn't help. Society often shames addicts. We treat addiction like a moral failure instead of the complex trauma driven disorder that it is. People who use substances to survive their trauma are then blamed for the consequences of that use, which only increases their isolation, their hopelessness, and emotional pain. The cycle is merciless, and unless we intervene with compassion, understanding, and proper treatment, it will continue. Yes, I have to say there is treatment out there, but we have to continue this. So, why trauma informed care matters? Okay, so this is why trauma informed care is not just a buzzword. It is absolutely essential. Trauma informed care means recognizing that behind every addiction is a story. Behind every relapse is a wound. Behind every defensive, shutdown, or aggressive person is a child who once felt completely helpless. In addiction treatment, trauma informed care looks like creating safety, building trust, and allowing people to move at their own pace. It's about validating their experience, not just minimizing it. It's about understanding that sobriety is not just about stopping a behavior, it's about healing a life. You have treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, the CPT, or you have EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and somatic therapies help people process their trauma, regulate their nervous system, and build their sense of self, and rebuild their sense of self. Without this trauma work, treatment often fails because you're asking someone to give up their only coping mechanism without giving them something else to manage the pain. Now, you will always hear me talking about prevention and early intervention because it's the work that we do in education. We can't only focus on treatment. We also have to prevent trauma in the first place. That starts with creating safe, stable environments for children. It means reducing domestic violence, supporting struggling families, addressing poverty, and ensuring access to mental health care. When trauma does happen, early intervention is critical. Schools, paediatricians, and community organisations must be equipped to identify trauma and respond with empathy and resources. We need to invest in social workers, counsellors, parenting support programs, and trauma informed education. Now, perhaps most importantly, we need to talk. We need to talk openly, without shame. We need to normalise conversations about mental health, substance use, and childhood adversity, because silence is one of trauma's greatest allies. And I know of my age group, of my era, no one ever spoke about it. It was frowned upon. So what are the role of schools and communities? Schools can be powerful allies in this work. They're not just places of learning, they're places of safety, structure, and connection. Educators are often the first to notice when something's wrong, but too often behaviours rooted in trauma like aggression, defiance, withdrawal are punished instead of understood. We need to train teachers and staff to recognise the signs of trauma and respond with compassion. Social emotional learning, restorative justice and trauma-informed disciplinary practices are essential tools. Schools can also partner with mental health providers to offer on-site counselling, peer support and parent engagement programs. Not that I'm saying some schools don't do it, but overall all schools should be doing this. Communities also play a critical role too. Safe spaces like youth centres, where they've gone, mentorship programs and recreational activities provide positive alternatives to the streets. When young people feel connected, seen and supported, their need to escape decreases. Community healing is just as important as individual healing. Then we move on to the lifelong effects of childhood trauma. So, childhood trauma doesn't disappear when you turn 18. Its effects can be long-lasting, lifetime. It impacts your physical health, raising the risk of heart disease, autoimmune disorders and chronic pain. It affects your mental health, your relationships, your career. It can shape your identity, beliefs and worldview in invisible ways. And unless we address this, it can be passed down continuously. Intergenerational trauma is real. A parent who never healed from their own trauma may unknowingly recreate similar dynamics with their children. This isn't about blame, it's about breaking the cycle. Healing your trauma doesn't just change your life, it can change your family's future. What does healing look like? Okay. Healing is not linear, it's not fast and it's not easy, but it is possible. With the right support, people can recover from trauma and addiction. They can build new pathways in their brains. They can develop health coping skills. They can reconnect with their bodies, their emotions, their loved ones. They can rediscover joy and purpose. But what you need to understand is that healing starts with understanding. Understanding that addiction isn't the problem, it's the symptom. Trauma is the root, and until we treat that root, we're just putting out fires without ever addressing what's fueling the blaze. Again, I always do my final thoughts. I'm sure you're used to this by now. So what do we do with all this information? Well, first, we educate ourselves and others. We break the stigma. We stop judging people for how they've coped with unbearable pain, and we start creating systems that help them heal. Second, we advocate. We push for policies that fund mental health care, trauma-informed education, and addiction treatment that actually works. And third, we listen. We listen to survivors. We listen to people in recovery. We listen to the kids acting out in school and the adults numbing themselves with substances. Because behind the behaviours we judge, are stories we haven't heard yet. The link between childhood trauma and addiction is real. It's powerful. But it doesn't have to be a life sentence. With compassion, awareness and real investment in healing, we actually can rewrite the story. So I will leave it there. If you have found this video helpful, or if you think someone in your life needs to hear it, then please share it. You're always welcome to comment below if you have questions or experiences you want to talk about. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more conversations or more videos like this. So until next time, yeah, take care of yourselves, but also take care of each other. Until next time.